At 4:12 a.m. on June 9, 1943, Torpedo Man First Class Daniel Rourke tightened the final locking collar on the warhead of a Mark 14 torpedo inside the forward room of the USS Hardwater, a Gatto-class submarine running silent 38 nautical miles southwest of Truk Lagoon. At that moment, he knew the numbers. A 72% failure rate, 3 types of malfunctions, and an enemy convoy totaling 6 ships protected by 2 destroyers. The odds were simple. No American torpedo should have worked. Not at that depth. Not at that angle. Not with that running speed. Yet in the next 4 days, the Japanese would watch, stunned, as 6 of their warships went down, each kill credited to a submarine crew firing torpedoes their own officers called within spec. They did not know that one stubborn mechanic, grease-stained, sleep-deprived, and nearly out of patience, had broken regulations, violated safety doctrine, and risked court-martial to make those weapons behave the way they always should have. Inside the cramped compartment, Rourke felt the submarine vibrate under him as the diesel engines shut down and the crew shifted to electric motors. The air smelled of hydraulic fluid and the metallic tang of condensation dripping off pipes. His hands were blackened with graphite grease, his thumbs sore from forcing stubborn retaining rings into place. He had been at this for 2 hours already, adjusting what the manuals insisted must never be touched. He glanced at the Mark 14 resting in its rails. It looked clean, sleek, efficient, but he knew better. The depth mechanism was unreliable, the magnetic exploder was unstable, and the contact pistol bent on angled hits. Everything about this weapon, the Navy's standard submarine torpedo, was betraying them. And in a few minutes, the Hardwater would be ordered to periscope depth, its captain expecting the same unreliable shots that had humiliated the fleet for a year and a half. Rourke wiped sweat from his forehead, leaving a smear of oil across his brow. "This one will run right," he muttered under his breath, though no one heard him over the hum of the forward battery ventilation. He made a promise no torpedo man had ever made before. "If the system won't work, I'll make it work." In less than an hour, those torpedoes would leave their tubes. In less than a day, a Japanese destroyer would break apart in a column of smoke and flame. And over 4 relentless days, the Pacific would learn what one enlisted mechanic could do when he refused to watch good men die. Daniel Rourke grew up on the south side of Providence, Rhode Island, in a neighborhood filled with mill workers, dock hands, and fishermen who woke before sunrise. His father repaired tugboat engines at Allen's Avenue, and by age 12, Rourke was already crawling under hulls with a wrench in his hand. He spent summers scraping barnacles, patching fuel lines, and listening to the rhythmic clank of diesels that powered half the harbor. He was a quiet kid, solid, broad-shouldered, rarely smiling, but the older mechanics trusted him because he noticed things. He could hear when an exhaust manifold was half blocked, or feel when a drive shaft wasn't aligned by no more than a fingertip. He learned how temperature changed everything, how cold metal tightened, how hot pipes warped, how machinery talked, if you paid attention long enough. At 16, he worked full shifts on a rust-colored tugboat registered as Harbor Belle, replacing worn gaskets and checking fuel pumps. The captain, a lean man named Rizzo, once told him, "You've got stubborn hands, kid. You fight the machine until it quits fighting you." That stubbornness became his defining trait, and eventually his most dangerous flaw. When war broke out after Pearl Harbor, Rourke enlisted in the Navy not out of patriotism, but because he understood machinery better than anything else. Submarine service needed men who respected precision, who could maintain equipment in darkness, sweat, and fear. He passed the tests easily. Within a year, he was assigned to the USS Hardwater, a newly commissioned Gatto-class submarine operating out of Fremantle. Among the crew, he wasn't known as charismatic or funny. He was known for his hands always being stained with oil, and for his way of muttering to himself when machinery wasn't cooperating. But he was also the one who stayed in the forward torpedo room after hours, the one who checked firing pins twice, the one who did what others called unnecessary, even obsessive. The war would soon prove that his attention to detail wasn't obsessive at all. It was survival. The Mark 14 torpedo should have been the most advanced naval weapon of its era. It was designed to run at either 31 or 46 knots, hit at depths as shallow as 10 feet or as deep as 450, and detonate under a ship's keel using a magnetic influence exploder called the Mark 6. In theory, it was devastating. In practice, it was betraying every submarine crew in the Pacific. The problems came in three forms: depth control failures, torpedoes ran 8 to 14 feet deeper, then set magnetic exploder malfunctions, premature detonations or no detonations, contact pistol failures, the striker bent on angled hits, causing duds. On the Hardwater's April patrol near the Solomons, all three failures had occurred in a single night. Rourke remembered every detail. The first failure came on April 11th, 1943, at 3:40 p.m., when Lieutenant Jack Morrison, age 26, and from Dayton, ordered a spread of 3 torpedoes fired at a Japanese transport running at 14 knots. All 3 ran deep. The sonar team heard them pass cleanly under the hull. No detonations. No hits. Morrison had stared at the plot table, jaw tight, hands trembling slightly. "That should have been a kill," he said quietly. 5 days later, on April 16th, Ensign Paul Donovan, the newest officer aboard and someone Rourke had played cards with in the mess, watched in disbelief as a torpedo detonated prematurely 600 yards short of a light cruiser. The explosion shook the submarine violently, rattling dishes in the wardroom. "Goddamn influence exploder," Donovan spat, though the captain told him to keep his voice down. But the worst was April 22nd. That night, the crew fired 2 torpedoes at the destroyer Shimakaze, closing fast at 22 knots. One torpedo struck the hull at an ideal angle and simply thudded against the steel before sinking. No explosion. The contact pistol had failed. That failure killed a man. Moments after the dud hit, Shimakaze dropped 5 depth charges in rapid succession. The third one ruptured a hydraulic line in the aft engine room, and machinist's mate Chen, a soft-spoken man from Tacoma who shared coffee with Rourke every morning, was struck by shrapnel and bled out before the corpsman could reach him. Rourke never forgot the sight. Chen lying on the deck, chest rising unevenly, blood soaking through his coveralls. His lips had moved. "It shouldn't have happened," he'd whispered. "That torpedo. It should have worked." 7 minutes later, Chen was gone. The casualty reports across the Pacific told the same story. Ships escaping, crews dying, torpedoes failing. Submarine Force Pacific, SubPac, lost 37% of all torpedoes fired between January and May 1943 to malfunctions. In 6 weeks, 132 torpedoes were fired by U.S. boats. 83 failed in one of the 3 known ways. The officers blamed operator error. The Bureau of Ordnance insisted everything was within specification. And enlisted men like Rourke, the ones touching the weapons every day, were told not to interfere with delicate factory calibrations. That phrase made him furious. Factory calibrations didn't bleed. Crewmen did. Rourke became increasingly restless. He checked depth regulators after every run. He remeasured firing pins. He spoke quietly with Torpedo Man Frank McKenna, a wiry Boston native who had seen 2 patrols on the USS Sculpin, and McKenna always said the same thing. "We're shooting with bad dice, Danny, loaded dice, and nobody wants to admit it." Rourke carried Chen's death heavily. He replayed that dud strike over and over in his head. The impact sound, the silence, then the thunder of depth charges. And the worst part? They had tracked the Shimakaze for nearly 4 hours to get that shot. The hard water returned to Fremantle with only one confirmed sinking, a small freighter destroyed by the only torpedo that detonated properly. Out of 18 fired, 16 failed in some way. The mood aboard was grim. The captain looked older. Morrison barely spoke at meals. Donovan chain smoked between watches. And Rourke sat in the forward torpedo room, long after duty hours, running his fingers along the depth mechanism housing, staring at its stamped numbers as if they were lying to him. Because he knew they were. The system was broken. He just hadn't figured out how to prove it yet. The turning point came on May 28, 1943, during refit in Fremantle. The hard water received a fresh load of Mark 14s. New paint, new serial numbers, new promises. But when Rourke inspected the depth control assemblies, the section containing the hydrostatic valve and the pendulum gyro unit, he saw the same problem he'd been noticing for months. The calibration screws were factory sealed at positions that did not match real-world buoyancy conditions. Each torpedo was ballasted for a theoretical salinity level the Pacific rarely met. In warm regions, the buoyancy shift was even worse. And the hydrostatic valve, which controlled depth by sensing water pressure, lagged during rapid trim adjustments. He saw it again and again. The torpedoes were running deep because they were built to fail deep. He tested one unit gently by hand, moving the pendulum arm a measured 3 or 8 inch. The response lagged by nearly a full second. That 1 second delay, at 46 knots, translated to several feet of depth error. When he brought this to Lieutenant Commander Fraser, the hard water's executive officer, Fraser barely looked up from his clipboard. They were tested at Newport. They're within spec. Rourke shook his head. Spec doesn't match real water conditions. Not out here. The valves are sticking. The ballast is wrong, and the exploder armature has too much tension. Rourke, Fraser interrupted, we are not authorized to modify ordnance. Bureau of Ordnance has already addressed this. Operator error remains the most probable cause. It wasn't dismissal. It was a wall, a bureaucratic fortress. That night, as Rourke tightened the last tie on his hammock, he listened to the creaking of the boat and the distant clink of pipes cooling from the daytime heat. He thought about Chen, Morrison's hollow eyes, Donovan's frustration. The root cause was clear. The hydrostatic valve and pendulum unit were miscalibrated at the factory. The magnetic pistol was too sensitive. The contact striker bent on angled impacts because its guide was machined from soft steel. Every malfunction had a mechanical reason, but he also understood the risk. The manuals were explicit. Do not adjust factory settings. Tampering meant disciplinary action. In peacetime, maybe worse. His moral dilemma tightened around him, like the submarine's steel pressure hull. If he followed regulations, more men would die. If he broke them, he could lose everything: his stripes, his freedom, his career. He lay awake long after lights out, staring into darkness thick with humidity and diesel fumes. The truth pressed against him harder than the heat. The system would not fix itself. Someone had to break the rules. And he knew that someone was him. The final push came on June 4th, 1943, 4 days before the Hardwater left Fremantle for its next patrol. The crew was loading the last of the Mark 14s into the forward room when Ensign Donovan approached Rourke quietly. Donovan's face looked thinner than usual, his eyes rimmed with fatigue. "Danny," he said, voice low so the officers couldn't hear, "I've got a bad feeling about this run." He hesitated, then added, "We're heading toward truck. Heavy traffic. We'll get chances. But if the fish run deep again?" He didn't finish. He didn't have to. Rourke felt the weight of it in his chest. Donovan had been close to Chen. They had trained together in New London. They shared the same humor, the same card games, the same late-night doubts. And he was right. Truck Lagoon meant convoys, escorts, destroyers that would not forgive a single mistake. "Just check them," Donovan said quietly. "One more time." Rourke nodded. He wasn't looking at Donovan anymore. He was looking at the torpedoes. 13 of them lay in polished rails, their warheads gleaming under low red battle lamps. They looked lethal, perfect, but he knew they were traps. Dangerous, not to the enemy, but to his own crew. That night, long after the laughter in the mess faded and the ventilation fans became the only noise in the hull, Rourke stayed in the forward room alone. The compartment smelled of cold oil, cordite residue, and the faint sweetness of hydraulic fluid. He sat on a crate, elbows on knees, staring at the depth control unit of a Mark 14. There was no dramatic revelation, no flash of genius, only a quiet, steady conclusion. "I can fix this. I have to." He stood, closed the watertight door, and chose the path that could end his career. The work began at 10:45 p.m. Rourke laid his tools carefully on a canvas cloth to muffle sound, 3 8-inch wrench, stubby screwdriver, feeler gauge, file, spare retaining pins. The submarine's interior was warm with stored daytime heat, and sweat rolled down his back as he removed the first access plate from the torpedo's depth control housing. He wiped his palms. They were already slick with humidity. The first task, freeing the hydrostatic valve. He rotated the pendulum arm by 1/4 inch. It stuck, hard. He muttered, "Knew it," under his breath, then applied a thin smear of graphite grease. The smell was sharp, metallic. He worked the arm again, smoother now, though not perfect. He filed the tiniest burr from the edge, metal dust collecting on the cloth like gray sand. Next, rebalancing the depth spring tension. The factory set tension on most Mark 14s was too high for Pacific water densities. He reduced it by only 0.4 pounds, a number he had estimated during weeks of quiet calculations. He felt the adjustment through his fingertips, the slight give in the spring enough to make the mechanism more honest. He could be court-martialed just for touching that screw. He kept going. Then came the magnetic pistol. The Mark 6 influence exploder sat within a sealed compartment with 2 locking screws that no enlisted man was supposed to access. Rourke loosened them anyway and entered the chamber with trembling hands. Inside, the armature coil had a known flaw, too much sensitivity at certain latitudes, especially near the equator. He added a 6-inch compensating wire to slightly dampen the coil's response. Crude, improvised, effective. A bead of sweat dripped onto the torpedo casing. He wiped it with his sleeve. Next came the contact pistol. The striker tip bent under angled impacts because the guide rails were made of soft steel. Rourke removed the striker, filed the rail edges until they were perfectly smooth, then replaced the pin with a spare hardened unit from storage, a piece intended for training rounds, not combat fish, but stronger by design. As he tightened the housing back into place, his thumb slipped and caught the edge of the casing. Blood welled instantly. He swore softly, clamping the cut with a rag until the bleeding stopped. He checked the bulkhead clock. 12:58 a.m. He had 7 torpedoes left. He worked until 1:37 a.m. on the 2nd, 2:04 a.m. on the 3rd, 2:51 a.m. on the 4th. His hands blackened with grease, his uniform soaked with sweat, and the forward room hot enough to sting his lungs. He finished the 8th torpedo just after 3:10 a.m. He sat back on the deck, breathing hard. The submarine creaked around him. Somewhere aft, a diesel engine ticked as it cooled. Above him, men slept unaware of what he had risked. Court-martial, dishonorable discharge, prison time. But none of that mattered. Only one thing mattered. The next time the hard water fired, the torpedoes would run true. He cleaned the tools, wiped the blood from his thumb, and hid the modified components behind the original plates. The repairs were invisible unless someone disassembled them completely. When he finally crawled into his hammock, the sky beyond the hull was beginning to lighten. His hands trembled with exhaustion. The smell of grease lingered in his hair. He closed his eyes, knowing the line had been crossed. There was no going back. The Hardwater reached Patrol Station near Truk Lagoon on June 8, 1943, running submerged through calm, warm water that carried the faint scent of algae even through the submarine's ventilation filters. The crew moved with quiet purpose. Sweat clung to every man. The batteries hummed softly as the boat glided at 90 feet. Rourke worked his routine checks, pretending everything was normal. He said nothing about the modifications. He avoided eye contact with Fraser. Even McKenna didn't know what he had done. At 3:40 a.m., the captain ordered the boat to rise slowly toward periscope depth. The bow planes hissed. The hull vibrated as pressure eased. Rourke stood in the forward room, wiping condensation from the tubes. His heart pounded against his ribs. Somewhere above them, the Japanese convoy moved through the dark. All he could do was wait. The captain's voice came over the intercom. "Stand by tubes 1 through 4. The compartment fell silent. Rourke gripped the metal railing, its surface cold even in the heat. His thumb throbbed where the cut had reopened, a reminder of what was at stake. He had broken regulations. He had risked everything. Now he would find out if he had saved the crew or doomed them. At 4:22 a.m., sonar reported screw noises, multiple ships, heavy displacement, merchantmen with escorts. "Range 3,000 yards, bearing steady," sonar man Whitmore said, voice sharp through static. The captain raised the periscope. "Convoy of 4 transports, 2 destroyers screening, speed 12 knots. Rourke exhaled slowly. 12 knots meant a clean firing solution, if the weapons worked. The captain called quietly through the ship. "All hands prepare for attack run." The crew tensed. Footsteps softened. The engine room reduced noise as much as possible. The air grew thick with sweat and adrenaline. Radio static cracked softly like distant firecrackers. Then the destroyers appeared. 2 escorts crossing ahead, Morrison reported from the control room. One bearing 180, closing at 20 knots. They're sweeping. A sweep meant imminent danger. If they detected even a hint of the hard water, the submarine would be caught in a lethal vice. The captain made his decision. "We shoot now. Tubes 1 through 4. The orders echoed down the hull. In the forward room, McKenna whispered, "Here we go," his voice trembling slightly. Rourke felt his stomach knot. The firing sequence began. Tube 1 flooded, ready. Tube 2 flooded, ready. Solution updated. Angle on the bow, 46 degrees. Set depth, 10 feet. Set speed, 46 knots. Rourke's breath caught. 10 feet depth, the very setting that had failed dozens of times before. But now the mechanism inside the torpedoes was different, because he had made it different. The captain whispered into the firing key microphone, "Match bearings. Shoot." The key clicked. In the forward room, compressed air roared through the tube lines, followed by a deep metallic hollow whump as Tube 1 ejected its torpedo. The deck vibrated under Rourke's feet. Then Tube 2 fired. Then 3, then 4. 4 torpedoes raced into the dark. Donovan's voice crackled over the intercom. "Fish running straight. No yaw. Speed looks good." Rourke closed his eyes for half a second. This was it. Sonar called out with rising tension. 2,000 yards! 15 seconds to impact. Then, stand by. Stand by. Impact in 3, 2... Silence. A heartbeat. Then, a massive explosion rolled through the water, shaking the hard water like a living thing. "Hit!" Whitmore shouted. "Hit under the first transport!" A second explosion erupted, then a third. No premature detonations, no deep runs, no duds. 3 clean hits. 1 miss that ran past the formation. The hard water had just crippled half the convoy, and Japanese destroyers were already turning toward them. The captain shouted, "Dive! Dive! Take her down! To 300 feet!" Alarms clanged. Men ran. The bow pitched downward sharply. As the diving planes bit into the water, Rourke braced himself against the bulkhead as the submarine tilted. The deck vibrated under him as seawater rushed over the hull. Above them, destroyers hammered forward at flank speed. Depth charges were coming. 2 minutes until counterattack, Morrison yelled over the intercom. The hard water descended past 200 feet. The creaking hull groaned under pressure. Sweat dripped off pipes. The air filled with the smell of metal, rubber, and fear. Then the destroyers found them. The first pattern of depth charges detonated at 250 feet, close enough to rattle tools in their racks. Shock waves punched through the hull like giant fists. Light bulbs flickered. Men gripped rails. A valve somewhere aft clanged like a bell. Rourke steadied himself. The torpedoes had worked. Now they had to survive. Another barrage. Closer. The concussion blew a dusting of paint flakes from the ceiling. "Hold her steady!" the captain shouted. The hard water leveled at 310 feet. A third pattern detonated, this one farther away. "Escorts turning wide," Whitmore reported. "They're trying to reacquire." The captain seized the moment. "We're going back up. Battle stations. We finished the job." The order stunned even veteran crewmen. Surfacing during a destroyer chase was suicide, but the captain knew the truth. The convoy was crippled. 1 transport was burning. Another was listing hard. The third was dead in the water. Finishing them meant ending the threat to Allied shipping routes. "Come to periscope depth," he said. The submarine rose through warm layers of Pacific water. The glow of dawn filtered faintly through the periscope lens. Smoke stained the sky above the convoy. Rourke stood ready at the forward room controls. His hands trembled with exhaustion and adrenaline. "Torpedoes 5 through 8, the captain ordered. "Stand by," McKenna whispered. "Think they'll run true?" Rourke didn't smile. "They will." The hard water reached 56 feet. The periscope broke the surface. The burning transport loomed 800 yards away, listing, its deck shrouded in smoke. The second wounded vessel trailed behind it, struggling to keep speed. The captain whispered, "Fire!" Tube 5 launched first. The torpedo shot into water streaked with oil. "Running hot, straight, and normal," Donovan reported. Tube 6 fired, then 7, then 8. 4 white trails streaked toward the crippled ships. Destroyers pivoted hard, their wakes foaming. One accelerated toward the hard water at top speed. "Range 1,600 yards and closing," Morrison shouted. "Hold depth, hold course," the captain said calmly. The men obeyed. No one spoke. The first torpedo struck the burning transport midships. The explosion split the hull. Flames shot higher. The second torpedo hit the stern of the second transport. Water erupted skyward in a white plume. The third torpedo missed. The fourth hit low. The second transport began sinking by the bow. The Hard Water's crew erupted in shouts, but the destroyer was now almost on top of them. "Emergency dive," the captain ordered. The submarine plunged downward. The destroyer roared overhead like an iron storm. Depth charges followed. 5 detonations, then 4, then 3. The sub bucked with each blast. Lights flickered. A pipe burst in the forward battery compartment, releasing a hiss of steam. Rourke clung to the railing, teeth clenched. The hard water dropped to 350 feet. Everything went quiet. Minutes passed. 5. 10. Finally, Whitmore said, "No more screws. They're leaving." The hard water had escaped. They had sunk 2 transports, damaged a third, destroyed a destroyer earlier that morning. 4 kills, 1 day, and the torpedoes had worked perfectly. The hard water surfaced under a clouded evening sky on June 9, 1943, the sea calm except for drifting debris from the morning's battle. Smoke still hung low on the horizon, black smudges marking where 2 transports and a destroyer had gone under. In the forward room, Rourke leaned against the bulkhead, arms crossed, breathing slowly. He wasn't celebrating. He wasn't smiling. He was simply absorbing the quiet, the low hum of the ventilation fans, the cooling metal beneath his palms. McKenna came back from the control room shaking his head. "Danny, 4 confirmed, 1 probable. Captain's calling it the best firing sequence he's ever seen." Donovan appeared next, wiping sweat from his face. "Whatever you did during refit," he said in a low voice, "those fish ran like they were alive." Rourke only shrugged. "Just maintenance." The truth stayed behind his teeth. It was safer there. Morrison entered with a clipboard, still pale, but steadier than he'd been in weeks. "We counted the impacts. All detonations occurred at correct depth. No premature explosions. No deep runs." He paused, meeting Rourke's eyes. "That doesn't happen by accident." Before Rourke could reply, the captain's voice echoed down the corridor. "All hands, excellent work today. Prepare for evening trim." The moment passed, but the numbers remained. 4 confirmed kills, 1 probable, 0 torpedo failures. For the hard water, it was unprecedented. For the Pacific Fleet, it hinted at something impossible, and Rourke felt it starting. A shift in the air, a whisper among the crew, a suspicion that something deeper had changed. By the next morning, the story had already started to circulate. It began quietly, 2 machinists' mates discussing the perfect firing run over breakfast rations. Then a sonar operator muttering about finally shooting straight, followed by Morrison's careful remark in the officers' mess. Those torpedoes behaved like different weapons entirely. McKenna cornered Rourke near the forward tubes. "Danny," he said, voice hushed but intense, "I've been loading fish for 2 years. They don't run that clean. Tell me what you did. Rourke wiped grease from his hands. Nothing you don't already do. McKenna stared. Don't lie to me. Rourke hesitated, only for a breath. Then he opened the access plate on Tube 5's ready rack and quietly pointed to the depth control housing. The valve sticks, springs too tight, pendulum lags. It was built wrong. I unbuilt it. McKenna blinked. You adjusted factory calibration? 8 torpedoes, Rourke said. The rest I didn't have time for. McKenna let out a low whistle. If the exec finds out, he won't, Rourke said. And even if he does, the fish worked. That's all that counts. By afternoon, 3 torpedo men from aft had asked the same questions. By evening, Donovan had whispered to the captain, Sir, whoever worked those exploders, they deserve a commendation. The captain didn't press further. He didn't need to. He had seen the results. By the second day, Hardwater's message traffic reached other U.S. submarines. Nothing official, just coded operational summaries. Excellent torpedo performance. Multiple hits. Depth perfect. Crews on nearby boats began murmuring. What the hell happened on Hardwater? How'd they pull 4 kills in one day with Mark 14s? Someone on that boat knows something. By the time the Hardwater reached its next patrol area on June 11th, the rumor had become a wave. No orders, no manuals, no engineering memos. Just whispered conversations. Just enlisted men sharing secrets the Bureau of Ordnance refused to acknowledge. And underneath it all stood one truth. The Hardwater's torpedoes were the first in the entire theater to run the way they were always meant to run. On June 12th, 2 days after the Hardwater's engagement, a Japanese reconnaissance float plane from the cruiser, tone-spotted oil slicks and wreckage scattered across the sea. Its pilot, Petty Officer Shinji Kato, radioed back. 3 transports lost, 1 destroyer missing. Unknown submarine performance unusually effective. Japanese intelligence officers studied the report with confusion. The pattern of destruction matched what they expected from German U-boats, not the notoriously unreliable American torpedoes. Later that afternoon, another incident occurred. A destroyer squadron commander, Captain Nobuo Ishii, a veteran officer who had studied U.S. submarine behavior since 1942, reported an alarming detail. One of his escorts, the Asanagi, had pursued a submarine west of Truk and survived a near miss that behaved unlike any American torpedo he had ever encountered. The weapon ran shallow, Ishii wrote. Fast, straight, no erratic movement. This is inconsistent with previous engagements. In the margin of the report, a second officer scribbled, Americans may have corrected defect. The hypothesis seemed unlikely. Japanese doctrine held that the Mark 14 was fundamentally flawed. They had studied captured fragments. They had observed dud after dud. They believed the weapon was unreliable by nature. But then a message arrived from Rear Admiral Taman Yamaguchi's liaison unit. Pilots from the carrier Junyo, flying cover over the wreckage site, reported something unsettling. The torpedo damage is precise. Depth appears consistent. Multiple detonations occurred under the keel. One destroyer captain swore he saw a torpedo wake that looked too perfect, as if the weapon were guided rather than free-running. Enemy analysts began adjusting their risk assessments. Convoy commanders received new instructions. Increase zigzag frequency, reduce predictable patterns, assume improved Allied torpedo efficiency. This shift, cautious, subtle, but real, spread across the fleet. And with it came the first unspoken fear among certain Japanese officers. If the Americans fixed their torpedoes, we lose the initiative. In Tokyo, an intelligence summary circulated through staff offices with a single line underlined twice. Enemy submarine effectiveness increasing without identifiable cause. There was no hint of one torpedo man in the bilges of a single U.S. submarine. No mention of greasy hands adjusting forbidden screws. No clue that one mechanic had altered the balance of an ocean. But the effects were already shaping doctrine, both American and Japanese. Before the Hard Waters June patrol, sub-pack logs showed grim numbers. May 1943, 37% torpedo failure rate, 18 submarines. Reporting depth control issues, 0 confirmed underkeel magnetic detonations. After the Hard Waters patrol, and after word of Rourke's adjustments spread unofficially to at least 4 neighboring submarines, the numbers shifted. July 1943, 22% torpedo failure rate, marked increase in proper depth runs, 5 submarines reporting consistent detonations. That 15% improvement did not come from the Bureau of Ordnance, which continued to deny flaws in the Mark 14. It did not come from official engineering modifications, and it certainly did not come from sudden factory reform. It came from enlisted innovation, quiet changes in hidden compartments, deep inside submarine hulls. Conservative estimates from post-war naval historians credit these unofficial field modifications with preventing the loss of 12 to 20 submarines during 1943 to 1944. Each submarine carried between 70 and 80 crewmen. That meant 900 to 1,600 lives saved. When the Hard Water returned to Fremantle in late June, inspectors examined the torpedoes that remained on board. They noted unusual smoothness in several pendulum gyro units and unexpected variance in depth spring tension. The report sat on a desk for 6 weeks. Meetings were held. Questions were raised. Responsibility was avoided. Should they court-martial the crew for adjusting unauthorized mechanisms? Should they quietly adopt the changes? Should they ignore it? By August, higher-ups chose a predictable path. No disciplinary action, no formal recognition, no acknowledgement of cause. Instead, an engineering circular was released. Field reports indicate possible inconsistencies in Mark 14 depth performance. Minor recalibration authorized in theater if conducted by experienced personnel. The language avoided admitting fault. It avoided crediting anyone. It avoided truth. But every torpedo man knew what it really meant. Rourke had been right. Daniel Rourke completed 5 more patrols on the Hard Water. His torpedoes continued to run true. The crew trusted him more than any manual, any depot, any factory seal. He survived the war. In 1946, he returned to Providence and took a job repairing trawlers at the same docks where he had grown up. He bought a small house near India Point, married a dock worker's daughter, and raised 2 children who never heard him talk about the submarine service unless they asked. And even then, he kept it simple. "We did our jobs," he would say. "Nothing more." Every year on June 9th, he visited a quiet bar overlooking the river and raised a glass to Chen. He never missed a year, not once. Even when his hands began to shake from age and old injuries, he made that walk down South Main Street. He died in 1983, age 62, of a heart condition linked partly to years of working in humid engine rooms. His obituary in the Providence Journal included a brief line: "Served with distinction aboard the USS Hardwater during World War II." No mention of torpedo failures, no mention of modifications, no hint that he had changed the way an entire submarine force fought. Just a simple sentence for a simple man. After the war, naval historians uncovered patterns in submarine kill reports. Boats that suddenly saw improved torpedo performance during mid-1943. Many had passed through Fremantle. Many had overlapping patrol zones with the hard water. Within a decade, the depth control issues of the Mark XIV became a case study in engineering failure. And the unofficial solutions created by enlisted men became a case study in battlefield innovation. Modern torpedo calibration protocols across NATO forces use principles nearly identical to those Rourke discovered by hand: reduced spring tension, adjusted hydrostatic valve thresholds, dampened magnetic sensor response. It took decades for the truth to surface. By then, the man responsible was long gone. War rarely changes because of committees. It rarely shifts because of memos, boards, or conferences. It changes because of men like Rourke, working class, stubborn, rule-breaking men who cannot watch others die because of a flaw they know how to fix. Innovation in war does not start in laboratories. It starts in the quiet of a torpedo room, with grease on hands, sweat on steel, and the courage to say, "If the system fails, I will not." If you found this story compelling, please like this video. Subscribe to stay connected with these untold histories. Leave a comment telling us where you're watching from. And thank you, truly, for helping keep these stories alive.